Hi, Grandma here, and I am reading Star of Light by Patricia St. John. And the first three chapters, we've discovered that Kinza is blind, and her stepfather and stepmother do not want her. They have, however, discovered the beggar does want her because people are more willing to give money to a sweet child that is blind. The beggar wants to move out of town, and he has made an agreement with Sai Mohammed, who is the stepfather, to buy Kinza. Chapter 4, Zohra Makes a Plan. Hamid stood on the outskirts of the market, his thin brown face turned upward, his bright dark eyes fixed on the top of the mosque, waiting for the priest to appear and shout the 4 o'clock prayer call. This was the time Kinza was released, and he could carry her off safe for another week. The crowd was thinning now, and Hamid could spot his sister sitting in a sad little heap beside her master. She was in disgrace because she had fallen asleep, and Hamid was impatient to rescue her. The mosque was the village temple, a building with a square tower dazzling white against the blue sky. A golden crescent gleamed from the top. At last the old bearded priest appeared and sent his chanted call ringing out across the marketplace. "There is one God," he cried, "and Muhammad is his prophet." Faithful Muslims flocked to the temple or took off their shoes and prayed where they stood, facing east, bowing low, and sometimes kneeling with their foreheads on the ground. The moment Hamid caught sight of the priest, he raced across the market, kissed the old beggar's hand in greeting, and snatched up his little sister. He had brought her a donut. She clutched it eagerly and took a mouthful. In the joy of feeling his arms safe about her once more, she forgot all about the hunger, thirst, and weariness of that long day and nestled her head into his neck, crooning with delight. Her tired little body relaxed and she fell fast asleep, as she had been longing to do for the past 3 hours. Hamid, a little bent from the dead weight of her, wandered home along the river path in the sweltering heat. He rested for a while under a fig tree, watching the river where the women were washing their clothes and the cows cooled their feet. He wondered where the river went. One day he would find out for himself. Once again, as night fell, the family gathered around the clay bowl and ate their supper by firelight and candlelight. Kinza, refreshed from her sleep, sat on her mother's lap, flushed and bright-eyed, opening her mouth for food like a hungry baby bird. Hamid watched her, loving her and remembering the pressure of her weary little body against his back. Always, always he would protect her and make her happy. The cows munched in the shed, and an old dog with a torn ear wandered in and lay down with his head on Rama's lap. Moths and bats flitted in and out, and the cat crept up and stuck his head into the clay pot to have supper with the family. Hamid, tired from his climb, lay down to sleep. He dreamed that the terrifying old beggar stood between him and Kinza. Suddenly he woke to find that the moon had risen and the grown-ups were still sitting talking around the dead charcoal. In the silver beams he could see their faces clearly, his stepfather grim and determined, Fatima cruelly pleased, and his mother pale and pleading. "It's the only offer we will ever get for her," said Sai Mohammed fiercely. "She will be looked after for life." "Life?" cried his mother bitterly. "There will be no life. She will die. She is so little and so weak." "A blind child is better dead," remarked Fatima. Zohra turned angrily on the old woman, but the man silenced them both by raising his hand. "Silence, you foolish women," he ordered. "Let there be no more talk about this. The child must come with me 3 days from now at dawn." He rose grandly like a king, and Fatima rose too, but Zohra stayed crouched by the dead fire, rocking herself to and fro in the moonlight. little daughter, she murmured brokenly to herself. And Hamid lay quite still and watched her. He dared not speak or go to her for fear of waking his stepfather, but his hot little heart beat very fast and his mind was completely made up. It shall not be, he said to himself over and over again. I will not let her go. It shall not be. He watched his mother creep away at last and lie down sorrowfully to sleep. She watched the pale patch of moonlight move across the doorway and rest on the cradle where Kinza lay dreaming. He saw the pale summer dawn begin to break and heard the first rooster crow, and all the time he lay thinking. But his thinking got him nowhere, and just before daybreak he fell into a deep sleep. 2 hours later he was woken by his stepfather prodding him with his foot. Wake up, you lazy creature, growled Simon Mohammed. It's time you had the goats out. Hamid rolled off the mattress, washed his face and hands in a bucket of water, and sipped his bowl of coffee. He glanced at his mother. Her face was pale and there were dark circles under her eyes, but she did not look as unhappy as he had expected. There was a very determined expression on her face, as though she had made up her mind about something. Once Hamid found her staring hard at him, and he stared firmly back. She raised her eyebrows a little, and he gave a slight nod. A secret understanding flashed between them. As soon as they could, they would talk together. They did not have to wait very long. Hamid took the goats onto the hillside with a crust of bread saved from his breakfast. He bribed a friend to watch them for him. Then he crept back and watched through a gap in the hedge. Soon he saw his mother go across to where the grindstone stood, and after a few minutes he slipped in and joined her. Kinza was sitting as usual with her face turned toward the eastern mountain, waiting for the sun to rise. Zohra sat cross-legged, turning the heavy wheel that crushed the corn. Hamid crouched down beside her and touched her arm. Mother, he whispered, I heard last night. Is it the old beggar who is to have Kinza? His mother turned toward him, and her calm, steady gaze rested on him for a moment, as if she were making a decision. He was a thin little boy, small for his age, but very tough, and his love for Kinza was very strong. Well, so my husband thinks, she replied, but I say that it shall not be. I will not have Kinza starved in those cruel streets. No, Hamid, you must take her somewhere else. You can save her if you wish. Me? Echoed Hamid, amazed. But the look he gave his mother was reassuring, full of bravery and willing courage. Chapter 5. Hamid Agrees to Help. Listen, said Zohra, and Hamid's eyes never left her face as she spoke. All his life he would remember what she said to him that day. 4 years ago, she said, your father took me to the tomb across the mountains. We left you children with your grandmother, but I carried your little brother Absalom on my back because he was only a baby. After we had visited the tomb, your father wanted to go on to the town further on. All day long we walked from sunrise to sunset in the burning heat. By the time we reached the town, my feet were cut and blistered, and Absalom was crying and feverish. His eyelids were swollen and stuck together, and he could not look at the light. Next morning, your father went off to the market to trade, but I sat holding my baby, shading his eyes from the light and brushing the flies off him. As I sat there, a woman from the town came up and began chatting to me, and she noticed the child. Your baby is sick? She asked. Yes, I replied, and turned his face so that she could see. She got up quickly. Come quick, she said. There's an English nurse. She'll give you good medicine and heal your baby. She healed my little boy when he rubbed prickly pear thorns into his eyes. I hung back. I have no money, I said. It doesn't matter, replied the woman. She is a holy woman and heals without money because she loves her saint. He is a good saint and has mercy on the poor. But, I objected, the English are rich and live in grand houses. She will not receive me. Oh, she lives in one of our houses, answered the woman, and those who go to her for healing are mostly poor. None are ever turned away. I tell you, she receives them in the name of her saint. So I followed, feeling afraid, but eager for medicine that would cure my baby's eyes. She led me down a narrow back street to a house with an open door. There were people coming out the door, poor people like me, with babies tied on their backs. Some of them carried bottles of medicine, and none of them looked afraid. We were only just in time, for the room was nearly empty. The nurse was tall and fair. I had never seen anyone like her before. She spoke kindly to everyone, and I saw her take little children up in her arms as though she loved them. As I watched her, my fear went away, and when everyone else had gone, I went up to her and held out Absalom. She took him in her lap and examined his eyes. Her hands were very gentle, and he didn't even cry. She asked me many questions about him. Then she gave me medicine for his fever and an ointment for his eyes. While she fetched them, I looked at a picture on the wall. It was a picture of a man with a kind face holding a little child in his arms, and lots of other children were clinging to his robe, looking up at him. I asked her who the man was, and she said he was called Jesus, and he was sent from God to show us the way to heaven. She told me a lot about him, how he healed the sick and made blind people see, and loved everyone, whether they were rich or poor, grown-ups or children. I know she loved the man in the picture and wanted to be like him, and that was why she gave me medicine and was kind to Absalom. Zohra paused and then went on speaking very slowly. I think, for the sake of the man in the picture, she would shelter Kinza, so you must carry Kinza to her. You must start tonight when the moon is full, and you must walk all night and hide by day, for Sai Muhammad will certainly search for you. But he need not know you are gone till tomorrow night. I will send Rama out early with the goats before he's awake and tell him you've taken them. He never bothers to look at Kinza in any case, and I'll put a pillow in her cradle in case Fatima glances in. But the time he comes from work, it will be dusk, and he cannot send out a search by night, nor will I tell him where you've gone. By the next day, you will be nearly there. Hamid's eyes were bright with fear and excitement, but he only said, "How shall I know the way?" "I've thought of that," replied his mother. "There is only one road you can take. You must follow the river to the top of the valley. Then you must climb the mountain. It is very high, but you must reach the top. Below you will see another river in a valley, and if you follow the road along the bank, you will at last reach a big main road with traffic. If you start walking up this road, it may be that a truck driver will give you a ride, for the town lies about 50 kilometers along it up in the mountains. If you cannot get a ride, you must walk it, and may God help you." "And when I get there?" breathed the little boy. "When you get there," said his mother, "you must find the house of the English nurse. Do not ask, but just watch. She lives in a street behind the market and opposite the doorway of an inn. Her house is the last one on the street. Go to her, tell her all our story, and give her Kinza. She will know what to do next." Hamid looked doubtful. "But what if she doesn't want Kinza?" he asked. His mother shook her head. "She won't turn her away," she replied confidently. "She told me her saint in the picture never turned anyone away. For the sake of her saint, I know she will receive Kinza and be good to her. Now, you must go back to your goats, and I must finish the grinding, or Fatima will be angry. Think about what I have told you. I'll bake extra loaves of bread for you to carry on your journey." Hamid got up to go back to the goats, feeling like someone in a dream. The world was really just the same as it had been yesterday, but to the eyes of the little boy, it seemed different. Yet in spite of his fear about the journey, he never thought of refusing to go. He whistled softly, and a few young goats grazing nearby came up and pushed their noses into his lap. He suddenly knew he loved them and would be sorry to leave them. He wondered when he would see them again, and for the first time he began to think about his own future as well as Kinza's. He certainly could not come back for a long time. His stepfather would be much too angry. He led them home early that evening and sat quietly down beside his mother and Rama, who were busy spinning wool. Both were working hard because Fatima was sitting by watching, and neither spoke when Hamid joined them. Hamid's young heart ached, except when his mother had gone on the 5-day pilgrimage to the tomb. He'd never spent a night in his life away from her. Now he must leave her for a long time. Her silent love flowed out to him, comforting and strengthening him. The evening dragged on and the light faded. Tonight, everything felt different. For the first time in his life, Hamid was not hungry when the family gathered around the supper bowl, but he forced himself to eat in case Sai Muhammad should notice. Then, without a word, he went out and lay down by the door and waited, battling with his fears and thoughts until his stepfather had laid down and the moon had risen. He watched his stepfather fall asleep at last and listened until his breathing became heavy and regular. Yes, he was sleeping deeply, snoring in his dreams. Only a little longer now. Hamid crept to the edge of the mattress and waited, with his eyes fixed on the mountain. On silent feet, he stepped through the doorway and slipped past the granary. The old dog cocked its ear and rattled its chain, and Hamid held his breath. If the dog should bark, the whole plan would be ruined. He flung himself down beside it, burying his face in its mangy coat, fondling its ears and wordlessly begging it to be silent. It turned its large head and licked the child's face, puzzled but loyal. So he crouched waiting with his arms around the dog's neck, listening for his mother. He jumped when she appeared with Kinza in her arms. In complete silence, she tied Kinza to his back. The baby wondered what was happening, but trusting them completely, she laid her head down on her brother's shoulder and fell asleep again. Then Zohra tied 2 loaves of bread on his other shoulder, took both his hands in hers and kissed them. He in turn pressed his fingers to his lips and clung to her for a moment. Then she gently sent him on his way and stood watching as he passed through the gate. Not a word had passed between them. Then, content with what she had done, she went back to her hut, to the empty cradle and the anger of her husband. And Hamid, like a small boat cut loose from its moorings and swept out into an unknown sea, set off along the moonlit path. So that was 2 chapters. The next chapter is called Adventures on the Way. And then in chapter 7, if we look ahead, it's Hamid completes his mission. But we are not even halfway through the book when Hamid completes his mission. So there must be a lot more to this adventure. See you next time. Bye-bye.